Welcome back to the Epic Investor Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about the power of a roll-up and the ability that business owners or investors have to take advantage of and be part of the roll-up inside of business acquisition and what that means as an investor and what it means as an operator, and how utilizing leadership and structure and opportunity within your industry can really produce more freedom of time and freedom of purpose. Today, I'm with Rich Jarvis, my partner in Impact Equity, where we help people understand the ebbs and flows of investments in real estate and in business acquisition. So let's get started. The idea here behind roll-ups is it creates exponential value by strategically acquiring and integrating multiple businesses into a single scalable platform. With the right systems and leadership in place, this model can deliver high returns and long-term passive income while building something that lasts. To illustrate this and kind of set the stage, I want to share the first bolt-on or the first roll-up that I was a part of in the early days of my private equity experience. We were managing a plumbing supply company, and we had 17 factories we were buying from over in Asia. And we'd import everything into California through Long Beach, and then we would redistribute those widgets, if you will, through the country. Great flagship company, awesome opportunities there for the ability to increase through roll-ups or to, they call it a bolt-on, but just buying a business and incorporating it into the structure. And about a year, maybe it was 9 months into that acquisition, I'm still kind of wet behind the ears, trying to figure out, which way's up and which way's down, and looking to really, leave my name and make my mark in the private equity world. And I came across, we were talking to our customers, talking to our sales reps, what additional items or what additional opportunities can we present to our customers to increase our revenue, to increase our offering. And being in the plumbing space, we had a lot of connectors, a lot of hoses, a lot of couplers, a lot of connector or elbows. One of the spaces that we were servicing a little bit was the HVAC industry. And learning more about the HVAC industry, they have the need for some anchor kits. And I don't want to dive too deep into that realm, but anchor kits kept coming back from our sales reps and from our vendors of, we need more kits. We need more anchor kits. Well, it just so happened, it was total luck. There was a gentleman in Costa Mesa who was looking to sell his business, and I found it online, of all places, on Biz Buy Sell. And so I opened up this offer, and I took a look at it, and it was super small. In our business, we were doing, $1 million of EBITDA, but he was doing something like 95 grand. Tiny little bottom line income. Is this really worth the work that's going to go into, performing a bolt-on? But because I was eager and anxious, I dove in and was like, let's just go see what the value has. So I called him up. I drove, the 30 minutes south down to Costa Mesa and met this guy at his office, and he's 91 years old.
No way.
Yeah, 91, and good old boy. Just salt of the earth, didn't really want to talk business, wanted to talk life. And I asked him.
Isn't it amazing talking to people, that have been through all the wars, everything, right? The battlefield of business, and they're there. Wow, that's awesome.
And truthfully, Rich, in hindsight, I wish I had spent more time talking to him and hearing the stories, that 90 years has to offer, right? It was funny, though, when I asked him, tell me more about your business, tell me what you do. He walked me in the back, and everything was just dusty, dirty. Cardboard boxes weren't like unloaded. They had just cut the top off of them and put them on the shelf. And rows and rows and rows of cardboard boxes that were like 30 pounds and 40 pounds of just little tiny nuts and bolts and screws and washers and anchors and plastic anchors. If you've ever hung a picture on your wall, you have to buy those red anchors that go into the wall so you can drill a screw into it, those kinds of anchors. and he would assemble these kits, and he had over 70 different variations of kits. So if that helps kind of, the imagery of how many rows and rows of kits there are. And I'm like, holy cow, what are we going to do with this? And so we go back up to the front office, and again, it's this dark room. There's one light hanging over everything. There's piles and piles of paper that have probably been there 50 years. And I asked the question, can I take a look at your financials? And he points at about 24 permapack boxes of tax returns and bank statements and handwritten ledgers. And I'm like, oh boy, and yeah, AI hadn't come around yet, so you can't scan all that and, whip it up in an hour. And so I'm sitting here thinking, I'm thinking to myself, there's literally a million screws out in the back. I can't count those. It asked me to do inventory, and I'm just going to say no. And now I got to study financials on paper. And here I'm complaining, right? Because we use QuickBooks and financial ERPs. But anyway, so I'm sitting there with the broker who's about 24 years old, just, brand new to the broker world. And I'm looking at him like, I don't know how we're going to get this done. We ended up buying his business for 60 grand. It was a super, super, super small acquisition, right?
Did he just wanted to sell it for something and just be out? And
well, I asked him, Tom, why are you selling? And I already knew the answer, right? I mean, the guy's of age, and but I was like, why are you selling? And he's like, look, I'm 91. I'm ready to take long walks on the beach with my wife, and I'm ready to go travel the world. And I just need to be done with this. His assistant was in her 70s. The gentleman that worked in the back was in his 70s. And so no one was going to come with the business. It was literally an asset transaction. 100%. We're buying a book of business, we're buying customers, and we're buying a lot of screws and nuts and bolts. And I remember calling the board like, how am I going to pitch this? And so before I did that, though, I called our sales reps and said, hey guys, here's the catalog. And by the way, the catalog was, as you can imagine, like everything else, it was old. It was kind of like looking through the yellow pages, that really thin paper with pictures of the kits that looked like they were hand drawn, with the takeoff next to it, like the B390X7Z is the item number. And that meant, it was a 1/4 inch, tap in screw. And literally tens of thousands. And so I'm like, guys, so I went to my sales guys and just said, what do you think? It's in our backyard. It's cheap. It's not going to be easy, but what do you think? And so they kind of did this soft sale of, to our customers. Hey, would you guys buy this? They loved it. So I go to the board and I make the presentation. Here's the deal. Here's what it looks like. This is what it's going to take to close the deal, 60 grand. And this is what the kind of work that's going to take. Well, we went for it. We committed to it. We didn't have to raise funds. We didn't have to borrow money. We literally could write a check from the operating account to acquire the business. Let's now illustrate the power of the roll-up here, okay?
Just to be clear, when you say roll-up, just for those that are new to that's never heard that term before, what does that mean?
Fair question, and I appreciate you expanding that. Think about a snowball rolling down the hill. You start with a little handheld snowball, and if you give it a little push and it starts to roll down the hill, how big is that snowball at the base of the hill? You're rolling up snow in that case, or in this case, you're rolling up business acquisitions. You're taking a string of companies and you are combining their offerings, you're combining their services, you're combining the management of those companies all into one large roll-up. Anyway, we went for it, and the power of this roll-up was pretty incredible. I admittedly went into this feeling like I was just a glutton for punishment. Like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? This is going to be a ton of work. Well, because in this situation, we were not bringing over any of the overhead of that company. I think we kept the phone line. I think we wanted to keep the phone number because they didn't have a website. They were literally in the yellow pages. Like, that was the way you contacted them. So, but we could get out of that. He could get out of his lease. We didn't have to carry over the insurance because our insurance carried it. We put their operation in our warehouse, and we set them up in the back, and we were able to absorb that operation internally without any increase. We didn't have to increase labor. We didn't have to increase costs that weren't already associated with the costs come over with that acquisition. We didn't see an increase. But all of the savings, all of the add backs, if you will, produced a $250,000 net income to our bottom line after 12 months. Now, what number comes to mind with a $250,000 addition to the bottom line? Well, in my world, you take all of, everything you do in business has a multiple to it, right? If I'm gonna buy this piece of equipment and it's gonna produce a smaller number to my bottom line. Well, if I want to sell the company for 4 times its earnings, then this is a X amount decision. Well, in this case, $250,000 to the bottom line at a 4 multiple means that was $1 million bump to our valuation. So a $60,000 check, a lot of pain, going through inventory and sifting through dozens of boxes of tax returns and other, ancillary information. And, obviously then trying to create the synergies of where can we get in, with our customers, with the customers we sell to, we now want to sell their products, but then they had customers that we could then sell our existing products to. So there was 1 + 1 was 3 in this situation. So there is, the imagery of the roll-up, the power of the roll-up. Now, I think that it's wildly important to understand this. Had we not already had that business, that flagship company, if you will, that could absorb that with its own systems and its own processes, I mean, you should have seen the look on my warehouse manager, my office manager, and my bookkeeper when I said, this is what we're going to do. This is what's coming in. And they looked at me like, what? We're going to do what? We're going to put together kits? Are you crazy? Well, it ended up not being as hard as everybody thought, and it actually became this really fun project. Like, people would break away for a little bit and go put kits together just to get their mind off of it. But we had the structure in place at work where we could load all of their products into our ERP. So now it's part of our system, right? Part of our billing, part of our order when we needed to buy inventory, part of our POs where we were creating tickets that needed to be picked by our warehouse people. It was plug and play, literally. And so I think that understanding the power of the roll-up has to come at the onset that you have an existing model or an existing structure in place. Otherwise, you can imagine the pain that might have come with adding, that small amount of chaos to existing chaos, right? It probably would have gone backwards. And we've seen that before in other companies within private equity where people will say, this is a good idea. We sell fertilizer. Let's go buy a company that then needs fertilizer and just join them. Well, they're 2 very different operations, they're 2 very different systems. Maybe the due diligence wasn't as sharp, and you end up marrying the 2 together, and then they go backwards, right? And now there's a negative feel. We had a situation where we rolled up. I was not part of the operation, but we rolled up 3 companies, and it ended up being a total war. Like, you brought in 3 operators that had to work together, that had a whole lot of pride and ego about, well, we do it this way and you do it that way and you're wrong. And anyway, it did not work. What I wanted to bring up, though, about structure was the benefit that we've seen to using EOS. And EOS provides, again, if you're in an operation where you're thinking, could I handle bringing on, if you're a roofer, for example, and you want to bring on a gutter business that's for sale, and you ask the question, can my internal operation handle this? And if you think that you don't have structure, I would highly recommend and encourage you to call an EOS implementer and just have a conversation and just talk to them about, what does EOS look like and how can I utilize that in my business? And you will find that it can provide that existing structure so that then you can focus as the visionary on playing chess and plugging and playing different businesses.
One of the things that caught my attention when you were telling that story, this concept of the roll up and this essentially a snowball, right? Everything we do with our investors is essentially helping them with their personal roll up. You were talking about the business. If you were going to buy that business all by itself without the systems that were already in place, it would have been a pretty significant lift.
Yeah, 100%.
Pretty hard to do. And the magic of having a personal roll up is being able to have resources go to work that already have those processes and systems in place, freeing up your time so you can go and focus on producing more. And you actually are able to scale your wealth that way versus being tied directly to a job or buying a new business that turns into a new job or buying a piece of real estate that turns into a new job.
I totally agree, and I love bringing it back to the epic investor. The opportunity they have to also see a roll up on their side of different, whether that's through real estate or business acquisitions or both. I had a conversation a couple days ago with a gentleman who currently owns about a dozen Subways, and he wanted to go buy some more. And the one comment he made that helped me understand that he's going to make it was this. I asked him, why are you wanting to buy more Subways? Because if you've noticed, Subways are not doing extremely well right now. And, why are you leaning into that industry if it's performing backwards? He sees an opportunity there. And he said this, we have a really good operator who has identified certain tricks that are actually increasing operational efficiencies in the 12 that we have right now. He wants more, and we're going to give it to him. This guy didn't even live near those Subways. His operator is doing it. His operator is lifting and wants more. He's hungry. Feed me, right? Well, there's part of, from the operations side, for those listening that are trying to get into a position where they can free up their time, right? And they can continue to be that visionary and go find more, but they're stuck in the weeds. And if you find an operator or a leader that can manage these details, and you can go find an additional bolt-on or a company to roll up into your existing company, you also can acquire systems. You can also acquire processes and additional leadership if you have the person in place to run with that, freeing your time and your ability to not only create wealth for yourself, but now you get to be the visionary, and you get to go play more chess and figure out, how am I going to improve operations? How am I going to scale this thing?
Well, yeah, with that example you had, 60,000, it increased 250,000 at the bottom line, which ultimately was $1 million of value that was created from that acquisition. Someone asked the question, how can you really multiply or scale your time? It's doing a roll up.
Yeah. I had a similar conversation with a dentist last week. We were sitting at a high school football game, and he says, and he and I go to a networking group here once a quarter, and he's like, Jason, I don't know how to scale. And talk about replacing time for money. How do dentists do that? There's only one way for them to do that, and that is to go acquire or roll up more practices. They've got to have the ability to go scale that, so that when they choose to take, 2 weeks off to go, on a hunting trip, they're not producing money. Their machine, their economic engine is still producing revenue for them. So otherwise, and I know tons of dentists where they go, I'm taking 2 weeks off and people are getting paid, but I'm not making any money. When you can produce a system that can be repeatable, that can scale on its own, for example, the plumbing company that bolted on this, kit company, call it a kit manufacturing, but a kit assembly business. You've then proven that you have a formula or a model that can be repeated again, and you can scale again. You can go buy these other companies and feed them into an existing business, an existing model, especially in this case, if it's import from China or Asia or other factories, because you already have those lanes. We were talking last week about an acquisition opportunity that is needing, they don't have distribution. They need distribution channels in order to scale. And you look at the acquisition that we're working on that has global distribution. Well, there's a roll up in the making there. right? And what does that do for investors? What does that do for an investor who looks at an existing business that says, you've already done a roll-up or you're performing a roll-up right now, that's a really good flagship company, I'll invest in that. Because it helps with diversification. They're not just now investing in the one widget that you make and sell. You're investing in the model that business creates, the system the systems that are within it. That kind of power attracts an investment. It attracts a senior lender who can say there's something scalable, there's something predictable about that. And I remember that plumbing company, the predictability of that deal, we had within $1,000 every month of where revenue and costs were going to be. And does that, I mean, those that are listening that stew over their numbers, if you could get your budgets within $1,000 a month, I mean, you'd be the most confident person walking around.
The roll-up really it's just a way to create value is what you're doing. For example, with apartments, if you can renovate an apartment or let's say update the landscaping and give it a facelift, and so now you have $100 more per unit, but you have 100 units, there's some significant value that you just created through that. What I like about developments is you're taking bare ground and essentially adding value on all of the different stages of its life cycle through horizontal, vertical, to where you have a finished product you're selling or delivering to market. That to me is true value creation. But that's what you're doing in a business. You're creating avenues for businesses to ultimately gain more value. We did a podcast on structure. As you do that, and it's underneath the umbrella of a structure that's tax favored, for example, Section 1202, Qualified Small Business Stock Purchase QSBS, you can get it to where you're acquiring these companies. The value increases in that $1 million, you just increased there is underneath that umbrella. And if you do it right, you can sell that company with all your capital gains tax-free. This is a beautiful way of describing how a business, it's not just about cutting expenses or increasing revenues in the sense of the traditional way of just selling more in that business. It's opening the doors of how many different ways can you add value to the company to increase its net operating income.
100%. The ways to do it are endless. In this case, that we talked about, it was actual cash value to the bottom line, right? There's a lot of examples where you could have a bolt-on because they've got the best marketing, in the industry, and you could acquire them and absorb them into your operation, and now your operation benefits from that marketing play that they've got, cornered the market with.
So let's say you have an investor, they don't want to be the business operator. But they want to benefit from business roll-ups. What can they do?
Well, are you talking about an investor or a business owner?
Investor.
So an investor wants to benefit from the roll-up, but they don't want to own the business, right?
They don't want to take the time to be the operator, right?
The only way you're going to do that is to have an operator who can run multiple companies. Or they could go park their money in different acquisition funds. They could go find people that are doing acquisitions, and they could become a part owner or an investor in that play. And there's situations where we've created like a pitch deck where we've said we're going to go buy this one roofing company because of its systems and structures, and we're going to go roll up 7 of them right behind it, and they're going to be absorbed under the operation of this business, and it's going to produce this kind of value in the end. It's a 5-year play, and an investor says, sweet, I can give you some money, and we can check in quarterly, and I can go sailing, I can go do philanthropic work. Cool, guys, here you go. Investment made, done. Power of the roll-up, right? Power for them, because the roll-up now produces the return that they need and want. And it also creates jobs. It creates experience for the people that are involved in it, and makes the community a wildly better place. I'll wind it down with this. I've got a brother-in-law who is really, really good at startups. He is really good at them. It's his lane. He found his calling. He's really, I've said it enough. He's awesome. And when I talk to him about business acquisition, he just shakes his head and he's like, what are you doing? Like, why are you going to go get into debt over that? Why not just start it from the ground up? And my point, the opening point here was rollups create enterprise value really, really fast. You can go buy these companies and you can roll them up, and under centralized management, cross-selling synergies, and you can create more value in those 5 years performing that roll-up than you can starting from scratch. I'm sure there's the outliers. I'm sure there's the anomalies, but you can't create that kind of value from the ground up because you can acquire customers along the way. When you're talking about these power of the roll-ups, right? It's the enterprise value that's created quickly. It's the systems and structures that are in place that either they currently exist and you can do the roll-up because of it, or you are rolling in the structure that you need in order to go perform more roll-ups. Either the leadership is there, so you're leaning on the leadership, which allows you to step back and own your time again, or you can acquire those companies that has the leadership in place so that you can still step back and be more of an architect rather than the operator. This obviously at the same time creates these platforms. We've talked already about how you can own a company that's got distribution opportunities, and now possibilities on that platform are as wide as you want them to be. And finally, puts you in a position where you're not the operator and you are now managing those people and helping them and, increasing their opportunities to increase or to scale their own careers, creating more jobs. And again, like I said earlier, you're the architect, right? You now get to build the house instead of actually be the one that's framing it. So power of the roll-up, I can't stress it enough. I think that given the environment and the climate today in the business world, it's a powerful tool for scale. If you're considering, how am I going to grow my business? How am I going to scale it? If you've got goals that you want to be out in 5 years or 10 years, and you're drilling down these marketing plans and you're drilling down the guerrilla efforts where boots on the ground and you're out knocking doors and hanging flyers, I encourage you to at least consider a roll-up and consider what verticals are available in your industries that would allow you some more freedom of time to work on the business rather than in the business, and watch that enterprise value skyrocket when handled correctly. So power of the roll-up, it's a good one. It's fun. It's exciting. Seat of your pants.
I love that, Jason. And I think when you're looking at roll-ups, you really have product, your brand, distribution, and operations, right? Those are the four main key areas. And you find a roll-up that maybe is really good at products. They've got a great brand. They just don't have the distribution or operations. But you have another company that has fantastic distribution and operations. And man, you start playing with those four components and creating synergy. And you've got a roll-up that will actually create a legacy that matters.
And then get really excited when you put all those numbers together and you see the new net income and multiply it by 4.
Or 5.
Then,
or
or
6.
5 or 10, whatever your industry merits. But
well, isn't it the higher the net operating income, the higher the multiple? So in other words, if you have a company that's maybe worth a 3 or a 4x multiple because of its size, you get the same industry, but a much greater NOI, their multiple is probably a 5 or a 6. So it's not only just adding more of those 3 or 4s, but combining them actually moves it as well.
Yeah, one of the heavy factors of the multiple is how much NOI is there, how much revenue is hitting the bottom line and can be taken home.
And then it becomes
100%.
more attractive. Yeah.
Any large PE firm that's out there that wants to buy a $5 million EBITDA company, you're going to be able to put a higher price tag on that than $1 million EBITDA. So anyway, this is the power of the roll-up. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your stories of your own roll-ups. Where have you won big? Where have you run into problems? Like, subscribe, share, comment. Happy to commiserate with you. Happy to celebrate with you. But we hope that people are understanding the power of that roll-up and what it can do for you and the legacy that you're building. So there's the roll-up. We'll see you next time on the Epic Investor Podcast. Thanks for listening.